All right. What's up, everyone? Yo, gonna start up in a sec. So if you wanna, I mean, there will be some stuff on the whiteboard today, so you might want to be pretty close. All right. Welcome back. Man, it's week 3. Snap. Just the days are just passing by. Fun fact: the program used to be 8 weeks long. So, if you're 3 weeks, you're like almost halfway through. The program's not 8 weeks long. Program used to be 10 weeks long. 3 weeks is still a pretty good chunk of 10 weeks. It's 12 weeks now. You're not even close. Not even close, baby. What? So much more to go. You're just getting started. Today's going to be a pretty big day. We've got a bunch of content to go through. But just like I said last week, I want you to approach these lectures as like, oh, like this is all stuff that I have to learn like right now. Like this is the last chance. Like I'm never gonna hear this again. In fact, some of the stuff that I'm gonna show you today is actually gonna be similar in theme to last week, where I showed you stuff and I said you're not going to be writing this code, right? Where it was very much like for educational purposes, we're gonna be looking at a particular tool that's very explicit. That you have to write a lot of stuff. But then when you actually go ahead and work on real projects, you're going to be working on tools that are more abstracted. Okay, so today's lecture, just like last lecture, is going to be split into 2. Right? Where the first half of the lecture, take it from a theoretical point of view. The second part of the lecture, you can take it from a more literal point of view, if you want. Right? There's a couple different topics that we're going to touch on. Web servers. I mentioned the word server last week. You worked with servers a little bit last week. We're like really going to dive into this. I'm going to talk about something called Express. You're going to get very familiar with Express over the course of the week, but really the course of the course in general. And then we'll look at some like specific things about Express. I'm going to push these two like way down. Look at that. It's like there's nothing down there until you go back a little bit and then it pops up again. So today is week 3, day. What day is it? 1. Nice. On the ball. You get 3 points. 3 points for House Gryffindor. So, I mean, number 1, how'd you like the past 2 weeks? Pretty good? Wait, would you do them again? No? No, you got tons of fun stuff ahead of you. Why repeat that? So you spent the past 2 weeks learning the code. Right? You know how to code now. If our marketing's like, oh, learn to code really well. You've learned to code. That's pretty good. But there's more to becoming a web developer than just learning to code. Right? Learning to code is just like learning to speak or to read and write. Just because I can, write, see, spot, run, doesn't mean I can write anything particularly useful. Right? So what we're looking at over the course of, really the rest of the program is using those skills, using JavaScript, your for loops, your if statements, your objects, all that, right, to do like exciting and interesting things. Last week, you started working around with some of that towards the end of the week. You learned HTTP, right? And I mean, real programmers call it HTTP. So what does this stand for? Hypertext transfer protocol, right? You also learn TKP, right? And TKP, right? What was TKP? Oh no, I got this wrong. TKP. This is the tin can phone protocol, right? So, yeah, I'm not trying to like trick you here. There's things you're learning, and each of these things has like multiple elements to it. You don't get the full picture right off the bat. That would be very overwhelming. Boot camp's already overwhelming. Why would we make it more? So, you started working out with HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and we're really going to dive into this. Specifically, can anyone tell me what you did with HTTP last week? Yeah. What did you do with HTTP? There you go. Yeah, send requests to servers. That's a juicy word. Look at that. You say this to anyone in the real world, and they'll look at you like you're nuts. What? Oh yeah, HTTP. Just send requests to servers. I'm just gonna make a GUI in Visual Basic and see if I can backtrace the IP address. Right? You're there. Right? You're there. Now I really like this. Send requests. Right? Because you're really tapping into what I call the HTTP life cycle. Right? I'm gonna do very light review before I start throwing new concepts at you. Can someone teach me HTTP? Just teach it to me. Teach me like I'm 5. Oh man. All right. Well, so today is week 2, day 4. Let's just start again. No. See, let's think about it a little bit. Send requests to servers. I ask you, okay, what the heck does that mean? What does HTTP mean? Why would I want it? Why are you trying to sell me HTTP? Yeah.
Is it like sending data with text so that to make things smoother between different servers and languages?
Smoother between servers and language. So you're touching on a couple things here. Some of this is actually very right, and some of it is not. I think you might be conflating 2 different ideas, and that's why I wanted to pop this up. There's a difference between JSON and HTTP. Right? HTTP, so HTTP is a protocol that says there is a client and there is a server. Right? So that's number 1. HTTP says there is a client and there is a server. Right? And if these two want to communicate, the only way that you can communicate using HTTP is the client makes a request and the server sends a response. Right? The server is not allowed to talk to HTTP. To talk to the client using HTTP. If the server tries to talk to the client without the client asking for it first, the client's like, "Don't look at me," right? "Keep your head down," right? Like avert your eyes when you speak to me. That's what HTTP is. That's the protocol. It says the client is in this situation where if they want to send some data, right, they're able to tell the server, "Hi, I would like to send some data," and the server receives that. And then generally, the server is supposed to send back a response. Right? If anyone ever, if tomorrow's lecture asks you, or if I ask you at the end of the day, what does HTTP mean? Right? The answer to that is request response. Right? Request response. The HTTP lifecycle, I'm going to use the board quite a bit today. The HTTP lifecycle is going to look like, I used to make my smiley faces with like lines. Feels super weird now. Does that mean I've grown up? Who knows? Soon I'll put noses on them, right? Isn't that weird? So anyways, shoot, now I have to. So here's my client, and here's my client, and my client wants to get something from the server. So the client's going to make a request and going to receive a response. And we really put ourselves in this mindset. Like, think back to like the treehouse and the tin can phone. The reason that I think that example is kind of really useful is because you force yourself to think about how you're going to get data across. Right? If I'm on one side and I want to ask, "Hey, can you tell me how many people are in the treehouse right now, right? I'm on one treehouse, and I want to ask how many people are in the other treehouse. I have to ask that first, right? And then that person sends stuff back to me. Right? And it might feel weird if I'm dealing with like this situation where there's only two things, and one of them is able to ask and get responses, and the other one's never able to actually send any message without being asked first. Right? But this starts making more sense when you've got like a network of tree houses. Okay? Maybe you've got 100 tree houses and you get one central place. You get one big central tree house where all the tree houses send their messages to. Right? I'll probably come back to that example in the future. Now, just to throw one more kind of useless analogy to you, or really to think of maybe limitations of protocols and messages. If you understand TCP, right, HTTP is a limitation on TCP, right? And it's a limitation like on purpose. So HTTP is going to be, TCP is going to be like being on the cell phone with someone and being able to talk to them anytime and listen to them anytime, right? HTTP is going to be more similar to communicating to someone through like paper airplanes. So if we have two buildings, and one of the buildings has a stack of paper, right, and the other building doesn't, it just has pencils, and you know, on the side with the stacks of paper, I also have pencils. The person with the paper can write on the paper, fold it into a paper airplane, and throw it. Then the other person's going to receive the paper airplane, open it up, you know, read it, maybe do some instructions, and then at the end, they can write back on that paper airplane and throw it back. Right? So we're going to put ourselves on that side of things this time. Right? What you did last week was you lived very firmly on the client side, right, where you were the one asking questions. Who are you asking questions to? Like, who are you sending requests to on Thursday and Friday? Yeah, the server APIs, but like which ones? The IP finder, right? There were other ones. IP vigilant, yeah. There was a cat one, right? No, there was a cat API.
Yeah.
Do you work at thecatapi.com or whatever? I don't, right? I don't know what's going on back there. How do those responses come back to you? I don't know, right? You send a request, and then you just kind of twiddle your thumbs, and then after a while, someone sends a response back to you. There's a very good chance that you send that request, and on the other end, there's an actual literal cat that receives the message and says, as a subject matter expert, and writes up a response and sends it back to you. You don't know. That's the beauty of HTTP, is that we're like completely separating two things. But we can facilitate this transfer of information through the process of request and response. Right? So often what people will call this is like a black box. Okay? You see that word pop up when you're programming a lot? A black box, meaning I put something in there and then something comes out. I'm like, all right, what happens in there? I don't even want to know, right? Who knows? Okay? I put something in, something comes out. So we're going to open up that black box today. Right? I want you to think of the opposite of the client. Right? So if the client was sending requests, right now what we're going to work on is we're going to receive requests. If the client was receiving responses, what we're going to work on is sending responses. Right? Does anyone have any confusions about HTTP that you want cleared up, like just right now? That's very weird, because no one explained HTTP to me. So, all right. If you do have questions, stop me literally anytime. Yes? Mm-hmm. 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 Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a really good question. So do you know how like you'll write some code and then you'll come back to it and you'll refactor it to make it a little bit better, right? And then you come back to it after a little while and you look at it and like, oh, I'm going to refactor this a little bit more. That's going to be the difference between net, the HTTP module, and then Express. Right? Like all of these can technically do many of the same things, right? They sort of overlap in a lot of ways. But we're going to find that each one of these is going to get progressively like easier to use, right? So net, you can use this to make servers, and you can also use it to make clients. HTTP, you can use it to make servers. I don't think you can use it to make clients. And then Express, you can use this to make servers, but it's much easier than doing it with HTTP. Okay? And this is the HTTP module, not HTTP like hypertext transfer protocol, but like the HTTP module. Okay? Same thing goes with like the requests, the request library. Right? You can do that with net. You can make clients with net. You can also make clients with request, right? Like those requests that you send. And then you can also do it with another thing called Axios, right? And as you go up this way, they just get progressively like easier to use as a developer. And so think like with the net library when you were doing the snake thing, or today we're going to be working with the HTTP module. You're going to see that I'm going to write a ton of code, right? And it's going to get very overwhelming really quick. Right? But then when I switch over to using a tool like Express, right, a lot of that like setup code just goes away. Right? So in answer to your question, like I would use the HTTP module or the request module like these when I need a lot of customization, which actually isn't very often. Most of the time, the things that I'm doing are very similar to things that other people are doing. So it's OK for me to move higher up on abstraction and use these things over there. Does that clarify that a little bit? So we'll see both the HTTP module and we'll see Express. I think you worked with the HTTPS module or something. Oh, no, I think you're working with that today. But like, I think you'll start seeing the difference between these as we work through today's examples. Are there other questions?
HTTP is a built-in module, right?
Yeah, it's a built-in module. Yeah. Net's also built in. Yeah. There's a whole ton of those like built-in ones. So what we're going to do, like I said, is put ourselves in the shoes of the server. And we're going to do this very, very similarly to what we did for the TCP situation. And so I'm going to start off by like straight up making a file maybe called server.js. And think back to the way that we built the server during the demo on, was that Thursday, I guess? Something like that. Is it Thursday or Wednesday? One of those days. Yeah, so one of the things that I made you do was I forced you to basically build up your own library, right? We had to build up our own like infrastructure for how we would even design that server client system. And then we saw that the code that we invented was very similar to the actual code that you ended up having to write. And so that's what we're going to do today, except with HTTP. And so, oops. I'm going to outline a little bit of what this file is supposed to do. Right? This file is supposed to create an HTTP server. Right? The server is supposed to listen. And then whenever someone makes any request, right? And I say any request because there's different kinds of requests. Right? But we'll just say whenever someone makes any request, respond with hello world. Right? Usually when we respond in HTTP, what kind of stuff do we respond with? What's that?
What do you mean?
So if there's this request and response, and I'll make this much cleaner. There's this like request and response flow to HTTP. So here's my client. And here's my server. The client doesn't just send requests like It's usually a bit more than that, right? There's usually a reason I'm sending a request. Yes. Right, so does the client send an HTML file? The server, yeah, there we go. So the server might respond maybe with some HTML content. What does the client usually request with? Maybe some get. You said a URL. I heard something else too. Right. Generally, you're totally right. There might be get, or what else might there be? Get, put, post, some verb, right? What am I trying to do? And then usually, or I mean pretty much all the time, this is going to be get and then slash something, right? Get me all the dogs, right? Get slash dogs. Right? Post slash Kanye West album, right? I'm adding a Kanye West album. Right? We'll explore that a little bit, but I just want you to remember at least that there's different types of requests, and then the server is going to respond, and it will usually respond with some data, and that data might be HTML, but then it will also respond with a number. And what does the number mean? Yeah, status code. There we go. So maybe 200. Right? Some code to say, hey, your operation succeeded or it failed. Right? There's variations to this, right? Like the response might have some extra stuff in it, but the very, very, very basic will say that a response is going to have a status code and then probably some data as well. Cool? So what we're going to want our server to do is whenever someone makes any request, and this doesn't matter if it's a GET request or whatever, I want to respond with hello world and then 200. Yeah. And those are my requirements. All I'm giving you right now. How do I start coding this up? Right. Again, very similar to what I meant last week, where this isn't real code. Right. What kind of things do you think I'm going to need? Right. So OK, cool. So I might have to go like, oh, HTTP equals, and then require some HTTP module. And why would I want to require this? OK, sure. Thinking less about the modules themselves specifically, but like, why would I want to bring something in? What's my next step here if I want to like create an HTTP server?
It's an object, so you have to do a dot, and then follow the creation protocol, which is create server.
OK, and then you were going to say something? Yeah, we're likely going to use commands from this library. I want us to work a little maybe sort of backwards like we did last week, which is if I have something that's supposed to listen, I need that thing to exist somewhere, right? Like I would like to be able to write something like a server dot on request, right? Like something like that would be cool. And then I need this server to come from somewhere. Right? So where does that come from? And then you said sort of the right thing, which is likely something like HTTP create server. I mean, likely. Now, we're like making this code up right now. If I wanted to say that whenever someone makes any request, respond with hello world, where do you think that that's going to go? Inside these parentheses? This one? Yeah. Does anyone have any? I mean, here, this might make it easier because I know some people may have done the readings. Let's call this Nima's HTTP. This isn't a real module, right? Like, we're bringing in Nima's HTTP module that supposedly has a bunch of helper functions for creating HTTP servers. And if I'm saying, OK, I create this server, and then I want to go server.onRequest. Right? Is this legal JavaScript right now? Sure. Well, do you see anything that's not in scope? Server, right? So how do I make server be in scope? Yeah. right? So maybe something like this, right? And again, this is, I'm not saying this is real like library code, right? We're really forcing ourselves to think about like where this stuff should come from, right? And then when we look at the real code, it's gonna be very similar to this, right? So, okay, I've got HTTP, maybe I bring that in from a module or something, right? Nima is HTTP module in this case, right? Then my server, maybe there's a helper function to like create this server object, right? Then I've written server.onRequest. Presumably this means every single time there is a request, this is going to be triggered. Right? How do I attach this last little bit that says anytime someone makes any request, respond with hello world? Promises, we got callbacks. Right? I'm curious to hear how would promises work here? Okay, cool. So server.onRequest maybe then. Right? Sure, that could maybe work, and I'd say.
I guess all you needed to do was send a response.
Sure, right. That's a good start to that. Server on request, and then I'm going to say that totally would work. I'm just going to go the callback route because that also works, and it's going to be more similar to the code that we're going to use. Yep. What's that? Server.listen for request. Sure, maybe that's what we decide it's going to look like. Server.listen for requests, and then you said I needed a callback.
Yeah.
Right? Can anyone tell me why I need a callback? What's that? Because it's asynchronous, right? There isn't going to immediately be a request. There might also be many requests, right? So I want to attach an action that will fire off whenever there is a request, right? Just to make things a bit simpler, I'm going to turn this back into on, because the word listen is going to come back for a different reason. Right? So on request, and then I can throw a callback in here, right? And this is where I'm going to say, okay, like a request has happened, right? Now I send back a response. Right? I've received a request, and now I send back a response. What does it look like to send a response back? Well, what might that code look like? Console log. So if I console log, then this message is only going to appear on the server. It doesn't go back to the. It doesn't go back to the client. I want to send a response back to the client. What might that code look like? Server.write. Okay, so this may work if I said server.write and some stuff. The problem here for me is that this looks like I'm writing to the server, but I am the server. I want to write to the client, right? I want to write to the client, and also, when we're talking about HTTP, we're not going to be talking about like writing to the client. This isn't TCP where there's like a persistent connection that you just constantly write back and forth to each other. HTTP is going to send a response back, right? And once you sent that response, that's it. You're done, right? So we'll probably want to use words like send or respond, right? So this is heading in the right direction, but it's not strictly right just yet. How do you think I'm going to send a response back to the client? What's that? I'm going to make a parameter. Where is that? In this one here. Right, and what could I write in here? Okay, maybe response. And maybe request. Okay, so you did some of the readings, I guess? Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to take ourselves back. Let me just say I have client. Right, let's say I just have the client here. Right, anytime there's a request, I have access to the client just like I did in TCP. And with TCP, I could go client.write. Let's say that with HTTP, we're going to go client.send. Right? Or client.respond. Respond. And then ideally in here, I would write hello world, and maybe also a status code. Right? Again, I'm inventing my own library. Right? I came up with the idea right now of, oh, this is going to be two different parameters. Maybe this is going to be respond text is hello world, and client.respond status is going to be 200. Maybe that's what this is going to be instead. Again, the place of mind that I want you to be in is that we're registering things that happen anytime there's a request. Here's what I'm going to do with that request. Right? And this is going to have to, like, since it's written in JavaScript, this is going to have to involve some things like callbacks, right, to deal with that asynchronous nature. Maybe when you look at this stuff in a different language, it's not going to be written like this. Right? But there's still going to be the idea of registering these listeners. Right? Now, at the moment, this is responding to every request with a hello world situation. And what we're going to look at in a couple minutes is we're going to change this in the real code. Like we're first going to take this, turn it into real code, make sure it works, and then we're going to add the idea of having different kinds of requests. Okay. Does anyone have questions about these lines of code here? I kind of really recommend every time you learn a new tool, right, or every time you learn a new protocol or a new kind of process, it'll help you a lot to take yourself back and say, OK, I'm not going to look at the code too much. I'm going to try and invent it myself and see how I would solve this problem. Right? And you're often going to find that you come up with very similar solutions to the real code. Right. We're going to write real code now. This is going to be called our brainstorm server. Right. Our real thing, I'm going to put it in a folder called HTTP demo. And I'm going to go server.js. Right. So we cd into the HTTP demo. If I go node server.js right now, nothing happens. Right. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring in the HTTP module. Right. So this is going to look very similar to what we built. Slight difference. In fact, or even if we take ourselves back to what we built, we might find some mistakes or some things that we could refactor and fix a little bit. So here's HTTP. If I run this right now, it's fine. Right? I'm able to go require HTTP. I always like to mess this thing up, because if you go node server.js afterwards, it'll break. Right? So I'm making sure that I'm actually bringing in something real. And I could console.log HTTP and just see what's in there. And, whoops. And it's a big object. Whoops. It's just a big object. There's a ton of stuff in here. Get, create server, outgoing message, agent, all these things. And I started noticing this other stuff up here. What are these? They're status codes, right? Here's my favorite one. Have you seen that before? It's an actual status code. 418, I'm a teapot. Here's the Mozilla Developer Network, the MDN docs for it. 418, I'm a teapot. It's the standard HTTP code or response. The HTTP 418, I'm a teapot, indicates that the server refuses to brew coffee because it is a teapot. Of course, why would a teapot be able to brew coffee? So in 1998, do you remember I showed you that like RFC stuff? There's like funny RFCs. Yeah, the pigeon one. Yeah, I put that into Slack, right? Yeah. So there's like the pigeon RFC. This is a standard for the transmission of IP datagrams on avian carriers. It's like, all right, well, here is a little bit of information about how we could transfer info by pigeons. There's actually some funny studies of like pigeon throughput, FeatherNet. Yeah. Here's IEEE Spectrum. Let's continue to the site. Pigeon-based FeatherNet is still wings down fastest way to transfer massive amounts of data. That's an April Fool's, but yeah. So the coffee protocol, hypertext coffee pot protocol, is an RFC that basically expands on HTTP to allow for internet-connected coffee pots. And the joke being that why would anyone have internet-connected coffee pots or appliances? That's so silly. And then years later, they made those like internet-connected juice things. All right. That being said, if we take ourselves back to this, it's kind of fun to like read through this. There's what's that? 404. No, there's a particular one. What's that book? The one about burning books. 451. That's what it is. Yeah. So I was trying to remember the number. 451, unavailable for legal reasons. That's a status code. Right? This is a status code that's been added to HTTP so that if a server cannot respond to a client, right, because that content is not legal, in that jurisdiction or whatever, right? The status code that's used for that is 451, unavailable for legal reasons. This is kind of neat when you go look at like, censorship and things like that. Stuff has to be coded up somewhere, and programmers thought, hey, wouldn't it be funny when they put in 451? So I do recommend looking through this stuff. Among the things that's in there is create server. So we have a function in there. So taking ourselves back to the brainstorm server, we brought something in, and then we just created a server. That's going to be essentially it here. Const server equals http.create server. If I run this now, whew, nothing bad happens. And I could console.log server. Right. This is my whole server object. It's got a bunch of stuff. See, it's got this events thing, events count, connections, keep alive, timeout, all these different things. And somewhere in here, I'm going to want to be able to go like add listener maybe. Right? So you can add a listener for any time there's a new connection or all this other stuff. Notice I'm making this stuff up as I go along because VS Code is just kind of like showing me the stuff that's in there. This is one way to do it. Right? Another way to do it is to like go look up the docs. The particular, and just because I have trouble remembering the particular thing that I want to do is when I create my server, I'm able to straight up pass in a callback. Right? This is similar to something that somebody had suggested. I'm able to straight up pass in a callback, and that's just because the people who made the HTTP module said that you should be able to. Right? They just decided it. And they decided that whatever you throw into this callback, whatever you throw into that callback should run when the server starts. Right? So when the server starts, this thing should run. Notice right now, it doesn't. Well, oh, sorry, I got that backwards. It should run whenever something like particularly interesting happens. Let me just take, I just got so distracted by the dog. So cute. That's all good. So let me roll just a little bit back. The HTTP create server function. If I go look at the docs, right, what it does is it receives a callback. And that callback will run whenever the server gets pinged. Let's say it that way. Whenever the server has something reach it, it'll run this callback. So callback for every request. The thing about this right now, though, is that my server is never getting any requests because it never actually starts up. It dies. So there's going to be a server.listen, and then I'll tell it to listen somewhere. I can tell it to listen on any port. So 1234 might be a good port for me to use. In Vagrant, you have access to a couple ports. And then what I can also do is throw in a console log in a callback that says, I am listening on 1234. I want us to see that this is heading in a direction that's sort of similar to what we'd made earlier, which is specifically that we at least had to create a server, and then we had to attach a callback in some way. The way that we came up with it was we went server.onRequest, right? The people who made the HTTP module said, oh, you can just pass that callback in when you create the server. And the one thing that we didn't do in ours was we never told the server to start listening, so maybe that's something that we'd have to do as well. I can run this now, and let's see. Node server, I'm listening on 1234. I could go to localhost 1234, and something really interesting happens. What's up here? It's loading, right? It's just waiting, right? Why is it waiting? Yeah, the server hasn't responded, right? This is my browser acting as a client has just made a request to localhost 1234. If I was to make a request to anything else, it would die, right? But if I go to 1234, it just waits. And what I see when I go over to my server code as well is I'm console logging that callback, right? Every single time someone makes a request. I can write anything I want. Hey, it's your boy. Now, what we want our server to do is to be able to send a response back. So it makes sense for me to have access to like a client. Right? Generally, the way that this is going to be written out is that the HTTP module gives you access to a half-built request and a half-built a full request and a half-built response. And, we'll see what the request looks like first. This is the request that's been sent in. So if I console log request, and I see what that request is, when I stop my server and start it up again, if I was to go localhost 1234 like a bunch of times, oops, 1234, there we go. Like a bunch of times. This here over on the server side, this is the whole request object. And it's massive. There's a lot to it. Right? It's really big. Do I care about all of it? Not even a little bit. Right? These objects, I don't know. As soon as you let yourself start reading this stuff too much, then it gets scary. But the important thing is that there's something sort of interesting in there. You know? Have I already made an anime joke with your cohort already? Yeah? Oh, man. OK, I've cashed that one in already. I don't want to alienate too many people. Nani? No. OK, so this is we get access to this thing. Right? And if I make requests from other places, localhost 1234/A, right? What I get over here now, if I scroll down enough and I start looking through the request, I'm going to find that there is a URL A and a method get, right? Which is cool. These are values in an object, right? It's free real estate. You just throw stuff into an object, you take stuff out. We can play around with this. Method get, well, hot dog. What if I did something other than a get request? Right? What if I did a post request or a delete? You've worked with curl, right? Did you like curl? You did? Curl is hot trash. I don't like it. It is hard to work with. I can't use it without looking at the docs, and that frustrates me. You can use something like Postman instead. If you like curl, like that's cool. You're a hacker. That's awesome. Postman, which I do recommend downloading. Whoops. I do recommend downloading. It's something that sort of looks like a browser, but you get to make, post requests to localhost 1234/ what's that? Right? And I sent a request. I sent a post request. When I go look at my server, all the way down here, I get to see that I got a post request to WhatsApp. The thing is, your browser through the URL, you can't make post requests. Right? So if you want to test those right now, you're going to have to use something like curl or Postman. Why am I showing you this? Well, I'm going to want to send back a response. And then probably I want to send back a custom response, depending on the request that came in. So I have access to the response. I just get it through the callback. Where does this come from? I don't know. Right? It gets built for you, and then it gets passed through in the callback. Right? That's the nice thing about callbacks, is that you don't need to know a lot of stuff. You just get to act as if you received something and you just move on. That's going to be really useful for us in the second half of the lecture. But I have this response. If I wanted to, I could console.log the response as well. Right? So let me just console log the response instead. I'm going to stop my server, restart it. I'm going to refresh this thing. Here's my response. It's again an object. It's got a slightly different structure than the request. Most of this stuff is absolutely useless to me. High watermark. You know, who knows what that means? TCP in here. I thought we were dealing with HTTP. Oh man, what? Oh no. But among the things that are in here is something that lets me go response.send. No, response.end. And when I do response.end, what I'm actually able to do is I'm able to pass in some data. And we could try this out again. And I mean, I might break this. Oh, no, I didn't. I got some data back. Meaning that if someone was to make a request to localhost 1234, the code that I've written right now doesn't even care about what kind of request it was, who it came from, any of that. It's just anybody who makes a request is going to get back this stuff. Right? So I could write hello world. And now I get hello world back. And what I'm particularly curious about is what happens when I inspect and I check the network tools. Have you looked at the network tools before? Right. So this is going to be a lot of fun. You right click, you go inspect. You may have seen the inspector before. Has anyone not seen this before? Cool. You have a bunch of options over here. Elements, console, audits. Ooh, I wonder what that is, right? Memory. What does my program remember? Right. And among the things in here is network. And what network shows me is all of the requests. All of the requests that happen on this page. So if I go on, Wikipedia, and I look at a particular page, network. When you refresh a page, you see all of these requests happening. And I get to see them happen, how long they take from when the request starts to when it ends. I get to scroll through all of them. Right? Not a ton of requests. Some of them are red. Maybe that means they failed. And if I click on some of these, then what I get to see is a breakdown of the request URL, what method was it, what status code did it get back. Right? A bunch of header information, which you'll dive into tomorrow and Wednesday. I also get to see the response. Right? So the response on Wikipedia is going to be a bunch of HTTP. The response for me, I thought it would only be one request, but it ends up being two. My browser, by default, makes a request to find the favicon. And the favicon is the icon that shows up right here. Right? But this one here was the request to A. It shows me it was a GET request. The response I got was a 200. OK. I never wrote 200, but it looks like the HTTP server just does it by default. And then when I look at my response is just some text. Hello world. I can get funky with this. I'm going to respond with H1, it's bold time. Right? And when I stop and start this and refresh it, whoa, it's bold time, right? Because the browser is going to start interpreting that text as HTML. and it'll render it accordingly. Right? And this is where the juices really start flowing. You're like, oh, I could build anything. Especially when you think back to what you have access to as a JavaScript developer. Right? I encourage people to do this once in a while. I'm like, hey, what do you have as a developer? You have for loops, you have conditionals, you have functions, right? You have callbacks, right? You have objects. One of the things that we could use here is an if statement. If, and then I showed you that request has a thing called URL in it. And I could say, hey, if the request is Kanye or /Kanye, then maybe I want a response end with an H1 that says, whoops, an H1 that says Yeezy. Right? Else if my request.url was Nora, I might want to response.end with, I wish Nora Jones would collab with Kanye, but like 2008 Kanye. And then else, it might just respond with, welcome to my website. And now when I restart my server, I have these if statements. I want you to see this isn't HTTP, right? These are if statements. These are the things you're already comfortable with. I'm just deciding which ones of these lines should run, right? So I can bring if statements in for that. So now when I go to any page, I get welcome to my website. If I'm at /AYY. If I go to Kanye, I get easy, right? And if I go Nora, I get, very heartfelt. I actually really mean this. Really wish Nora Jones would collab with Kanye West. I don't think she ever did, right? No. There's just, it could be great. I have a multi-page website here, right? If this was 1998, I'm all set. Like I have. You want to throw a button in here? Button, woo! Right? Got myself a button if I restart the server and I go to any page. Whoops. Woo! You want to throw in some client-side JavaScript? I'm just going to show you something that you're going to do next week, but you can attach to buttons on click, lowercase, on click. And then I can go on click. I think I can go console.log. I'm going to get this horribly wrong. Or we'll do alert. Yeah. Yeah, OK, that didn't work because I'm bad at this game. Unexpected end of input. Oh, yeah, no, I'm like really bad at this game. You kind of know what I'm trying to do, right? Yeah, okay, so let's not go off the rails there too much. The thing here that I'm trying to say, though, is that like I could, if I wanted to, just start writing entire HTML documents in here. Right? Just entire documents. You know about backticks for strings? With backticks for strings, I can write stuff on multiple lines. I am Nima Vascarino, and then I might even put in an image with a source. Right? I could write entire documents in here. Yes? Why not? Why not, though, right? Like, and do you know who I am? Yeah, no, I probably wouldn't do this, right? Well, like, is this a huge problem? What's the main problem with this? It's too much information. All right. Well, let me take this. Right. Let me take this file. Right. I'm gonna go const Kanye page. I'll save that somewhere, and then I'm gonna respond end with Kanye page. Is that bad now? Right? Because I can do that here. I didn't do anything super funky. This is, again, the thing that I just did right now, it's not HTTP. I'm just using a variable to store a value somewhere. Right? At the end of the day, this is how websites work. Right? Some number of if statements or whatever, right, to decide what to show you. Right? I've made myself a little thing over here. Right? And I can send some stuff back. Now, if I wanted to, I could also go, oh, okay, well, if the response, if the request URL is Kanye and the request.method is get, then I do one thing. And then I might have another one for when it's Kanye and it's something else, like post. Right? I could think about everything that I want, like every single possible route that needs to exist, and just make if statements for each one. There was a question over there, and then that, and then this. Yeah. Like this one here, could I put this somewhere? Sure. You use the FS module, right? Do you remember using the FS module last week? The FS module can write to the file system. It can also read from the file system. Right? So what I might do, and I did this in another demo, and I'll send this to you. Yeah, just because of time. I might have a page saved somewhere. Actually, I'll do this right now. If I bring in the FS module, and I could go ahead and I could say, hey, you know what, my home page, I want to read it from index.html. And then I might go to my files, and I might make an index.html, and I could write some stuff in here. Yeah. I might write some stuff in here, like an H1 that says, woo, and an H2 that says, zombocom, and a p tag that says, the only limitation is yourself, right? Yeah, exactly, right? So here I've made a separate file, and I could write my server to say, the home page comes from this index.html file, and when I want to respond, what I can do is instead of responding with this string that says welcome to my website, I might respond with homepage. Right? Again, this isn't HTTP. This is JavaScript. Right? I'm reading something from a file. And when I run this now, and I go to my page, I end up getting, woo, Zombocom, the only limitation is yourself. Right? And this is cool, right? Because if I really put my mind to it now, I can actually start building a pretty big website. Right? I can make pages all over the place. Right? Just page. Right? And depending on the request coming in, right, I might choose to show one page or another page or yet another page. Right? Something that I haven't shown you is that you actually have access to response .status code. Status code. And what you can do with the status code is you can set it to things like 404 if I wanted to. And now I'll see that when I go to my network, even though the page actually did come back, I hard-coded it to respond with a 404 not found. Right? If I'm feeling extra cheeky, 418. Right? And now it's 418, I'm a teapot. It's kind of funny. Right? You have absolute control over this. Now, we're going to end this first half on 3 thoughts. The first thought is, heads up. If this code feels very confusing to you, that's totally fine. I've tried to write this in a way that's sort of horrific. Like I've tried to write it in a way where you're like, ugh, gross. It's disgusting. It's so bad, right? Like absolutely unacceptable. Here's another example from like another lecture that I did where I just ended up making it really, really ugly. Response.status code, response.setHeader. That's to tell the server, to tell the client, I'm sending you some text HTML, because you might also send back some JSON. You can also set your own headers. You can set headers like Nima's header and just throw a bunch of stuff in there. So this thing can get pretty nuts. So that's the first thought. Is like, what would you want to do to make this a bit nicer? Specifically, thought number 2, one way that I want you to start thinking about how this could become nicer is to think about what is bad about it. Right? The thing that I think is bad about it is I hate if-else-if statements. I hate these things. Right? I hate them. You have to like just make my way through. If you miss the word else on one of these, okay, then you end up with 2 separate things, so both of those might happen. It's just a lot. Also, it's squished all into one place. So I'm going to start thinking about how do I spread this out a little bit, okay, so that I can tackle bits and pieces of it at a time. And thought number 3 is I have websites like Wikipedia. When I go to Wikipedia, even if I go to different pages, they have very similar structures. Right? What might a word for that be? A template, right? There's templates. So I go to these different pages, there's different templates. What does the idea of a template remind you of in JavaScript? What's that? Class, maybe? Yeah. Yeah, class, so that could be a thing, right? We might have a class that represents a template, and then maybe we instantiate that class with the right amount of data. That's one way to do it. Classes in CSS slightly different, but we'll say like class in JavaScript. I think you're definitely onto something there. Another thing is, let's say I have this idea of some input, like some data, and then this comes out being like a picture that has that input in here. What is this in JavaScript? A function, right? We might have a function that takes in some data and then packs it into a template and sends it out. Right? So that might maybe give me the possibility of building things like a function called const make article page that takes in maybe some data. Right? And then maybe what it returns is going to be an h1 that says data.title, and then a p tag that says maybe data.content, p tag, right? So I mean, this is conceivable, right? Like it's an entirely possible thing. I can sort of start imagining how this might be used in JavaScript. But do you have any idea how that might be used if we do a separate HTML page? In the body tags here?
Yeah.
Just do what? Yeah? Ooh. That would be really cool. Like import variables into the HTML page? Yeah. From that server code, import it here. That might be a really cool idea. I'm going to say that right now, I don't know how to do that, right, with this stuff. But that's definitely a place I want to get to, right, is be able to write in here stuff that says data.title and data.content, right, just directly inside of this HTML file. I'd love to do that. Right? So chew on those things during the break. When we come back, we're going to see that we have a tool that actually solves those problems for us in a really elegant way, right? But I don't think it's as effective to kind of just immediately see those problems solved without running into these problems first. So it's 11:05. I'm going to give you. How do you feel about 12 or 13 minutes of break? Right, so in 12 to 13 minutes, we'll start up. All right. Y'all think it's fair if we start up? Cool. So, what we did in the first half was we took a look at the HTTP module. HTTP is terrible. No, like that module, no one uses it. Such a good dog. No, like it's very. When I use basic, I don't mean easy. I mean basic as in like it doesn't give you a lot to work with, so you end up having to do a lot of footwork, right? And that's really annoying. Because ideally, I'd like to just be able to express myself and say, hey, when somebody makes a get request to /dogs, or when somebody makes a post request to /music, right? It should be easy to express that. Obviously, if statements, yeah, sure, like if statements do that, but it feels really weird, right? It feels really wordy. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. And if you feel that way, you're not the only one who does as well. So in comes kind of like another tool that's built on top of the HTTP module. So it's built on top, but it's supposed to make your life a bit easier by having some really convenient like shorthand and also having some patterns that have already been defined for us. So that tool is called Express. I'm not going to motivate the idea behind Express too much other than just showing it to you to start off with. I want to be really clear. This is not going to be a tutorial on Express. Right? Like I won't stop and explain every single piece of syntax. Right? I'm trying to give you like a working kind of show of it because your assignments are going to be the tutorial on Express. That sound all right? And so if you come out of this being like, oh, but I don't get that one thing, I may or may not help you. Right? Sometimes I feel kind of bad, but sometimes when people ask questions, I'm like, haha, it's a great question. You should look at the curriculum. Take a look at Compass. But I'll answer some questions. Now, I'll start off by like CDing into Express. I'm going to show sort of like two tools. One of them is Express. Another one has nothing to do with Express, but it's going to make my life quite a bit easier. You'll see it in a second. Express.com, shop the latest trends in women's and men's clothing. Now we'll scroll a little bit further down. Express.js.com is a Node.js web application framework. Ooh, look how minimalist it is. Wow. Let me set. Whoa, so hard to read. It's cool. So let's zoom right in. It's a fast, unopinionated, minimalist web framework for Node.js. What does that mean? You're going to find, this is something that we talked about a little bit at the beginning of last week. There's libraries, right? Libraries generally bring in like some functionality that you can use. A framework's kind of like a really big library that imposes its own opinions on you, on how you should use it. So it's still a library, but it's sort of like people who only shop at one store. Right? They could shop at other stores, but they really just shop at this one store, and their whole life is kind of like molded by it. I don't know if that's the best analogy, but you'll see what I mean in a sec. We have to start off by npm installing. So if I wanted to npm install something in this new folder called Express that has nothing in it, do I just go ahead and just go npm install? Or is there something that I do first? Init. npm init, and then -y, just because like I'm happy with the default one. Now I have a package JSON. Go npm install Express. Okay. All right, I played myself there. Do you see the problem? I tried to install a project called or a package called Express, but I made my project called Express. All right, Express demo. Now I've got to delete my package JSON because it says Express in here, or I would just go Express demo. All right, npm install Express. There we go. And now it's installed the stuff. Added 50 packages. What? That is wild. That is bananas. That is absolutely bananas. We could go through some of this. QS, raw body, statuses, all kinds of stuff. Express, right? I guess I installed Express. Debug, all these things. Cool. I didn't ask for any of them, but I guess they just come with Express. And again, it's always fun to just check out how big these files get. Maybe this one's not that big. 1.7 megabytes. That's fair. I did zero work. Sure. Let it take up 1.7 megabytes of my precious, precious space. The forests are burning. But, anyways, yeah.
Sorry, a very quick question. So in your package.json, you have dependency as express, right?
Yeah.
Now, you uploaded that on GitHub. If I wanted to clone
Yeah.
your project and I downloaded that thing without the node module, and I have no clue that you are using express, should I just simply go npm install and then it would look into dependencies?
I mean, that's what you're supposed to do, right? Like, you're supposed to go npm install whenever you clone a new project.
And that's about it.
That's about it. Then the question is like, oh, I wonder what those dependencies are, Nate. A thing pops up like, oh, what's your favorite mother's maiden name? Like, oh, here you go. Yeah, you're supposed to just go npm install. It reads the dependencies, and then it downloads everything for it. And if those dependencies have dependencies, just like we did last week, then it downloads those. And if those have dependencies, you know it's going to download those other ones too. Here's a fun question. What if something has a dependency that has the original project as a dependency? Right? That's possible. Right? That's totally possible. What happens then? They solve it. They flatten the dependencies and they figure it out. But what if this project has dependencies of a particular version, and then this project has dependencies, again, of a particular version, and then this project here has the original project as a dependency, but of a different version? What does it do then? Well, then you got two versions of that original project to match all the dependency versions. So that's always fun. There's fun things to kind of deal with. You don't have to deal with it. Like, npm deals with it for you, but it's kind of funny to think about. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and make a file called server.js. Right? Does it have to be called server.js? No. You'll often find when you do Express stuff, for some reason, people call it app.js sometimes. No difference. Index.js, it's all the same. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to call console.log. We really out here, just to make sure that I've got this set up properly. And I didn't, because I'm not in the right place. Best demo node server.js. And we got we really out here. We're in game. I installed Express. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go Express equals require Express, because I have no idea what it is. I have no idea. I'm just going to require it. I'm going to go console.log Express, and we'll see what this is. Here is Express in all its glory. Wow. Yeah, we got headers. There's all this stuff. It's all right. In here, I'm going to find, not necessarily like a create server. But what I will find is that I can call Express as a function. Right? If I did this on its own, it doesn't get angry. Express is a function. And if I go const app equals Express, again, I called this variable app for no real reason. I could call this potato. Right? When I console log, I got something out. What kind of thing did I get out? This is an Express server object. I get the entire server. In here, you could go .on, add listener, very similar to that HTTP server that we made. It's just that some of the functions are going to be slightly different. Right? So if you dig through this, or if you really dive into some of these things, you'll find that they do things that aren't particularly new. Often, people will just straight up call this app, just because the word server is long, and you don't want to write server, 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 server all the time. So some people just like to go app. I'm going to use the word app today. right? I think tiny app makes you use the word app as well. Doesn't actually make a difference. If I go app dot, VS Code's pretty smart. Again, it'll show me what lives inside of app. App dot listen. That's a thing. It's a function. And in the same way that I can make my HTTP server listen, I can make my app listen. I just have to give it a port. I'm going to make this listen on port 5243. Why? It's just a random number. I don't think there's another process on it right now. And then I can give it a callback. Console.log express is listening on 5243. That's all I need. Express is listening on 5243. That's my code. Then I have a server set up. Now this doesn't look very different from what we built a second ago, right? It's going to start looking pretty different soon. So I know that my Express server is listening on 5243. Have I said what should happen every time somebody makes a request? No. Right? I haven't written anything about like when somebody makes a request. Nothing. So what do you think is going to happen if I go to localhost 5243? What should happen? It should just hang? Right. And why is that? Yeah, because I have not specified any response. So I'm going to go enter. And, oh, what? It's not loading. No. Everything I know is wrong. Right. So it didn't just hang. It actually responded with something. It responded with the words cannot get slash. And if I go anything else, it'll say cannot get that whole thing. Right? And I could even check the network tools. So here's the network tools. When I check this thing, here are a bunch of fonts for some reason. But the important part here is this here. When I made that request, it responded with 404 not found, which is weird because I didn't say that you should do that. When we did this with HTTP server, like it would just hang. So what I want you to start thinking about here is that when we're dealing with Express, we're not just dealing with stuff that we've written. We're dealing with stuff that other people have written as well. Okay. Express has a whole layer of stuff that's going on. So I'm going to start using a particular word. This word's called middleware. It'll start making sense as soon as I tell you what it's in the middle of. I'm personally of the opinion that you can learn to use Express kind of okay without understanding middleware. But to really get it and to really feel comfortable with it, the first thing that you should sort of pay attention to is middleware, right? So I'm gonna harp on this idea quite a bit, and then the curriculum doesn't go into it too deep because you don't really need it for TinyApp. But I know some people want to go a bit deeper, so just come talk to me about what middleware is. So we've said that a client sends a request, and then the server sends back a response. They just have to look different. So a client sends a request, and the server sends back a response. Meaning, if we put ourselves in the shoes of the server has to receive and send something. And that might be a complicated process, right? If I receive a request, I don't immediately have the response ready, right? There might be a series of steps that I have to go through to fill in that response. For example, if somebody asks, post a new status, right, to Facebook, the server might first have to check, is this person logged in? Are they allowed to post statuses, right? Who should the status be available to, and all this other stuff, right? So the server might just generally have a bunch of logic that it needs to go through, and that logic, we might want it to be like sort of modular, because I might want to reuse parts of that logic in other kind of routes, right? At a high level, we'll look at what that really means. The way that Express, this is Express, the way that Express decides to give you as a server writer access to the building up of that response is that Express has, I'm going to see, does this work? Express has basically a pipeline that it tosses stuff down. So as soon as a request comes in, what Express starts doing is it starts building a response. And this response is going to be empty, right? It's just a basic kind of empty response. By default, it's a 404. Right? By default, it's just going to say, I couldn't find what you're trying to get. Right? That's the very default one. Right? But, and then we'll say down way at the end of the pipeline, send the response. Right? So Express has this pipeline already kind of set. A request comes in, it builds an empty response, and it sends that out, say 404. And what we have access to with Express is to put ourselves sort of in the middle, right, and add or slot in bits of functionality. Right? We can slot in, oh, you know what? Actually, set the status code to 200. Right? I might even put in another slot that says, oh, change the text to say this instead. Right? So we're going to be working a lot right here in the middle, adding little bits of stuff slotted into this pipeline. And we've got to kind of act as if we're on like a conveyor belt system or whatever, right? Like you do something and you kind of pass it on. We're going to look at what that code looks like real quick. The idea of middleware is built around this app.use. Again, I've called this app. You could call this potato, and then in that case, it would be potato.use. Right? Generally, the documentation you'll see is going to say app. So I'm just going to use app to be consistent. We say app.use, and then what you get to pass in here, right, and the people who made Express made the decision to kind of make this as separate as possible. You can have app.use, and then you throw in a callback. And what this is saying is that anytime somebody makes a request, this thing here is part of the pipeline. Right? This is a user-defined part of the pipeline that's in there. I'm going to find now that when I stop my server and I restart it, when I make my request, first of all, at the moment it's hanging. So we'll talk about that in a second. But what I got over here was hash dashed, because I put this app use in the middle. So app use lets me put a new thing in the pipeline, but now that it's in the pipeline, it's blocking everything. Right? I've blocked that process that was working before. So let's say if I put myself, right here, and this was my console.log, I'm not doing this process now. I'm not passing it on to the next people. So this callback structure, it needs to have the ability for me to be able to pass it on. So what we get access to when we do app.use is this callback actually gets the request, it gets the response in case we wanted to do things with the request and the response, and then we also have access to next. Okay? Where next just means I'm done, pass it on. So here I'm building some middleware that every single time somebody makes a request, it passes through the middleware, console logs this thing, and then just passes it on to the next thing. So my request will still 404 because that's what the default pipeline does. But I've tapped in to put in a bit of console logging. And this is kind of cool. This on its own is pretty neat because what I can start doing is I can say there was a new request. Right? There's a new request, and specifically, I could go console.log. The method was request, and I still have access to request.method. And I could say the same thing with URL. Request URL is request URL. And what I've built for myself here is a pretty interesting piece of middleware that shows me every time somebody makes a request, what kind of request was it? And this might be useful to me for like debugging purposes. Right? I might even want to put this in every one of my projects, right? Because it's particularly useful. Do you know what I mean by this? Right? It's logging. Right? If somebody was to make a post request, it would say method post. What we're seeing here is the beginnings of the fact that when we have this pipeline, these things that we slot in, you can even think of them as plugins. Right? There's this default project that actually works. It just 404s every time, but that's what it's supposed to do. And we can extend it by adding plugins. And often what we'll do as we're working on projects is that we'll bring in our own, like our plugins from NPM. Here's one called Morgan. Morgan is HTTP request logger middleware for Node.js. Right? So it's the thing that we just built, except they've added a bunch of functionality to it. I can go npm install Morgan, right? npm install Morgan, and once I've done that, what I can do here is I can go const Morgan equals require Morgan. This thing is going to be very, very similar to the thing that we just built. And if I want to use it, I can go app.use Morgan. And then the nice thing about Morgan is you can configure it. So I'm going to go Morgan dev. And that's going to be showing me some set of information. There's also, you can configure Morgan to like show you a ton of info, not a lot of info with colors. Right? Now when I start this, when I make my requests, this here is the information from Morgan. Right? So this was the one I made. This is Morgan in there. And I really want you to see how painless it was for me to start, like, to put that in here. It didn't involve changing other parts of my code. And so that's the idea behind middleware. Is it's this extendability that I get to leverage as I slot things into this pipeline. Yes.
What was the dev that you put there?
The dev thing. If I take a look at the Morgan docs. They have tons of options like Morgan Tiny, Morgan Combined, Morgan Common. They're just different formats for what the Morgan text comes out to look like. So if I turn this one into Morgan Tiny, then we're going to see that the only real difference is that this isn't like yellow anymore, and then they've flipped these two things. Yeah, right? Depending on what your tastes are. So
is Morgan like an analytical tool?
yeah, we might use it for that maybe, right? In this case here, it's just going to be useful for me to like look at my server and see who's making requests to it, right? How many requests are happening? Yep. For this one here, right? So I didn't put next, right? I didn't put next, but the thing is, I didn't write Morgan. What happens when you call Morgan dev is it makes a callback. It creates one of these. So I can trust that the people who made Morgan, they're handling next. Right? They're handling. So we can start from the idea of middleware is this thing that we put just in the middle of our pipeline. I could comment this thing out if I want, and now I just have Morgan. And I said that what we have access to is, and I'm going to start going REQ, RES, and next, just because I don't like writing the word request and response over and over again. But you can go request or REQ or anything you want. Docs are often going to say REQ and RES. Since I have access to the request in here, I could go if the request is, the request URL is Kanye, right? Then what I might do is and then Express gives me access to res.send whenever I want to send some data, right? So I could go request.send, and I could just go Kanye page, easy. And this is the case if the request URL is Kanye. Else, maybe I call next. You see here, this is a piece of middleware that I've written that actually branches this pipeline. Right? It either short circuits it, right, or it passes on to next. Right? So when I take a look at what happens now with my thing, any page that I haven't written, a case for is going to do this. But if I go to Kanye, then I got my Kanye page easy. Right? The thing that's sort of like immediately nice about this is that I can make one of these, for every page. And that's kind of nice because instead of having like lots of nested if statements, I can make lots of little middlewares. And it's, I could even collapse these if I wanted to. And that's kind of nice. But it's still not nice enough. I mean, I totally could go if Nora, and then Nora please, whatever. Now I have two different like routes, right, based on the URL. So stop, start, and I got Nora, I got Kanye, and I got everything else. Maybe this doesn't feel like such a big improvement over the HTTP server stuff, but we can actually improve this a little bit more. What Express gives us as shorthand is instead of having to write our routes like this, I can say app.get. So this says anytime somebody makes a GET request to /Nora, then I can actually get rid of a lot of this stuff. So anytime somebody makes a GET request to /Nora, this thing's going to run. I don't even need next anymore because I know, in my case right now, I know that this is the last thing that's supposed to happen. Right? If it hits this route, then it should just send the page, and it shouldn't go on in the pipeline. If I wanted it to, like, yeah, maybe I would use next. But in my case, I'm like, no, all I want it to do is, if I get a GET request to /Nora, send Nora, please. And I'm going to find with these, like, it's one expression. Right? When I restart my server, my page for Nora is still going to work perfectly. And this here is the massive benefit for Express, is that defining new routes becomes as simple as going when somebody makes a GET request to this. Right? And then I get to write all the stuff that I want to do. Well, in this case here, I'm not using request. There might be reasons that I might want to use request. For example, if I was dealing with people who were supposed to be logged in, then I would check in that request, is this person logged in? At the moment, I'm not even doing anything with it, so it's sort of like a wasted variable. Right? If I get rid of it, though, like this will stop working because you can't just call it RES. The first value in the function is going to be the request, so I have to have that in there. In some languages, sometimes when people don't want to deal with stuff that comes in, they'll do underscore to say that it's like a trash variable. I'm not going to do that, though. I'll just go request. So I could change my Kanye one to be that as well. I think this is wild. Are there questions about this at the moment? I'm going to bring in one tool that is not at all related to Express, other than the fact that you've probably noticed that I have to stop and restart this over and over again, and that's really annoying. There is a thing called nodemon. Right? So you can install nodemon. If you ask different people, they'll pronounce it differently. Some people say no demon. It kind of looks like no demon. Stop. Bad demon. Demon, no demoning. And then you can save dev it or whatever, but I'm just going to go npmi node1. And then what you get when you do this is that technically inside of your node modules, nodemon, bin, nodemon, you get this long thing that replaces your calls to node, but it watches your files. So every time your files change, it'll just restart your server. Right? So I'm going to take this whole, you could take this thing, and instead of just going node server, I can go nodemon server.js, and now it'll say, oh, I'm watching that file. And you're going to find that whenever I change this, it'll say, oh, restarting due to changes, and it'll restart itself. It's pretty cool. Right? It gets annoying to type this whole thing out. So what most people will do is they'll take this, and just like, I think you had to do something similar. You put it inside of your package JSON. Have you all seen that before? If I go into my scripts, yeah, you did it for Mocha. So I might go start, right? And maybe that's my thing. You can call this anything you want. Potato. I could call it potato, right? And when I do that, now I can go npm run potato, and it'll run that script. Right? Note, when you're doing this on Vagrant, Compass is going to tell you that you have to go -L. That's because nodemon has a hard time watching the files in Vagrant unless you tell it to watch it in a specific way. And the way for that is -L. If you don't have -L on Vagrant, nodemon's not going to work. Like, it just won't restart. And so you'll get to that when Compass takes you there. So I'm going to add a couple things sort of very quickly. Here's, Nora, please, if I wanted to add another route, this one's app dot maybe post music. Adding new music. Right? Maybe that's what happens. And when I go over to Postman, actually I got to make sure that npm run potato is running. If I go post to the right address, and that was music, then I send, and I got back adding new music or whatever. Right? Did I actually really add any music? No, that was fake. It was just text. But I could start imagining that maybe I have an object that stores values. And maybe my post is supposed to add those values in there. Now, what I'm going to do for right now is I'm actually not going to do very much with post, right? Because post is going to have some special things going on. What I want to show you instead is doing extra funky things with get. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and make three. We're going to make three things. We're going to go and say const dogs equal, and then this is going to be an object. Yeah, it's going to be an object, and this object is going to have a bunch of like dog names. Right? Does anyone have a dog? What's this dog's name? NASA? Oh, that's cute. NASA. Right? So we might have NASA, right? So name is NASA. Fave food. What does NASA like to eat? Potatoes. Cool. And then quirky fact. I'm a dog. Right. That's NASA's like bio. Does anyone else have a dog? Or a cat? I don't judge. I like cats. Rocky? Your dog's name's Rocky? Nice. What's Rocky's favorite food? Just everything. Any quirky fact about Rocky? Wow. All right. We're going to have a whole lecture dedicated to that in the future. Rocky fights bears. Right, so here's some information about Rocky. Yeah. Right, and then what I get to do ideally is if I wanted information about a particular dog, I would just go grab it. Right? So I'm going to make app.get /dogs maybe. And I want to say, oh, OK, well, when somebody makes a GET request to /NASA, what we're going to do is we're going to go const dog equals dogs NASA. Right? And then maybe we're going to res.send the info about that dog. If I do res.send and dog and I send a JavaScript object, it'll just automatically turn it into JSON. Right? It'll just do it.
Is that Express doing that, or is that?
Yep. Yeah, Express, the send function is pretty magic. Right? So if you pass it some text, it'll send text. If you pass it an object, it'll turn it into a JSON object. You can send all kinds of really weird things. It's a great question. I'm going to let you Google that. Yes, you can, and I'll let you look up how that works. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go, OK, dogs /NASA, and I got information. Whoops. I forgot to pass in rec and res. And it told me res is not defined. That's how I saw that. It's going to say, oh, here's the information about NASA. And I would like to be able to go /Rocky and get dogs Rocky. Like, I want to see that info. Right now, I've only made a route for dogs NASA. Does it make sense that I should have to make another route for dogs Rocky? That feels silly, right? Especially when we think about something like Wikipedia has millions of articles. Do they have routes for each one of those articles? No, right? Let's say that I did do this. Let's say that I did do Rocky. When I see myself repeating myself, whenever you see code that is repeated, what is your natural instinct as a developer to fix that? Make it a function, dry it up. What does making it a function mean? It means take in some parameters, right? Make this a little bit more generic. Particularly, the thing that I want to be generic here is the dog name, right? So what I can do with Express is I can say colon and then a value, and that actually turns it into a pattern. So this is going to match anything that goes /dogs /something else. Anything. /dogs /Rocky /dog /NASA /dog /potato. Anything that matches that pattern is going to fit in here. And what we're going to do is dog name. If we want to access that, we can go rec.params.dogname. Right? Any of these things that we put up here with a colon, you can go request.params. And then the name of it, right? And that will be in there. Right? So now if I wanted to use that dog name, I could go just straight up dogs request.params.dogname. I think that this line ends up looking way too long for me personally, so I like to do it in 2 lines. Right? And now what I have is I have a dynamic situation where when I ask for Rocky, I get Rocky's info. When I ask for NASA, I get NASA's info, right? And we've really started building a dynamic web server here, right? That takes in data, uses that data to fetch the proper stuff, and then returns a custom response. I'll stop you there on the word API. The answer is yes, but sort of, no, API is the most confusing word because it means 8 different things, right? I'll let you explore what that means as we go further in this week, right? For right now, the only thing I want you to get from here is that this box actually takes some inputs, and those inputs can be sorted dynamic, right? And that's cool. I could now make a Wikipedia style thing, except instead of sending back HTML pages, it just sends back JSON objects every time, right? Sort of useless, but the UX is pretty bad. Right? So our last step here, right, and we're going to go over by just a couple minutes, but it's going to feel like I'm rushing through this last thing, but it's because I just want you to play with it as opposed to just watch me use it, is I'm going to answer that question from way, way back at the end of the first half, where the problem was when we have something like this, our index HTML page, and I want to send this back. I can still do this with Express, right? I can still load in a file and then just send that file. But My question was, how do I get this thing to actually have some kind of like inputs, right? I think that's something you came up with, right? Like saying it would be really nice for me to say like, oh, well here, that's the input name and the whatever, the content. And we're gonna solve that. This is called a template, right? We're building a template. We need an engine that will actually read the template and pack the data in. There's many options. The one that we're gonna choose is called EJS. Right? EJS stands for Embedded JavaScript. Right? Embedded JavaScript, because it's gonna allow us to write some JavaScript in our HTML that's going to be used to pack in data. Right? So I'm gonna go ahead and npm install EJS. That's my first step. npm install EJS. The instructions for today's assignments are going to take you through this. What I'm going to do after that is inside of my program, right, inside of here, really anywhere after the line where I go app, anywhere after this line, I can go app.set view engine. And set the view engine, this is the template engine, to EJS. Right. App.set view engine EJS. I want you to think of EJS as sort of like a last step of middleware, right? It's just the syntax that they've chosen doesn't use app use, it's going to be set. But it's one last thing in the pipeline, right? That's going to take some data and it's going to pack it into a template and then respond with that template. So this line here, it might feel magic for right now. We'll see it in a second. Over on the dog side, what I'm going to do is, instead of just sending back dog, what I want to do is I'm going to say res dot, and now I actually have access to the word render. What I say is I want to render a particular page. This is the dog page. Right? Res render dog page. I'm going to leave this line at this for the moment. This isn't the last time we come back to this line, but for the moment, this is it. I'm going to go ahead and try to refresh this page once I've started my server up. Did I end up installing EJS? I did. And I get an error, right? Which is fine. I didn't go through all the steps yet. I'm kind of like exploring this as it breaks. Hopefully this doesn't die on me. It says it failed to look up the view dog page in the views directory. So this is something that we have to do when we install EJS and when we set up this like renderer situation, is your project needs to have a folder called views. And inside of the folder called views, you need to have a file. You need to have a file called, dogpage.ejs. And that's actually enough. When I do this now, I have a blank page. And I can write all the HTML that I want in here. I could write h1 dog page. So now anytime I go to /dogs / Rocky, what I'd end up getting is dog page. And the last part here is I want to be able to change this from being dog name, then I wrote dog food, and then dog fact. Instead of having this stuff be hard-coded, I would like to be able to have this stuff be dynamic. Now, this is going to be done in 2 steps. The first step for me is to go here and actually write special tags. These tags are not going to look like HTML tags. They're going to look like this, right? They're called EJS tags. I get to say, within this, I can write any JavaScript I want, like 1+1. And that stuff will actually be evaluated before it hits the screen. So something I might want to do is actually deal with some values. For example, dog.name. Now, I don't currently have dog accessible on this page. The place where the dog lives is over on the server page, and I want to pass that into here. So what we have access to is we can pass an object to render with any of the variables that I want on the other side. So if I go dog and then name, and I could go potato, over on the other side, I actually have access to dog.name now. Right? Now, I don't just want to pass like name and then fact and whatever. I want to actually pass the proper dog. So I might just go ahead and go res render dog. Notice this is a property of an object. Often, people will call this template vars. Right? They might call it template vars just to make it really explicit that these are the variables for the template. And if I go ahead and I go to Rocky, I get Rocky now. If I go to NASA, I get NASA now. Right? If I go to somebody else, there was no dog with that name, so it just breaks. Now my job is just to go ahead and for the dog page, change this to dog.favfood and then dog.quirkyfact. And we got that. And we've built Wikipedia. You can now build that with this template, with these dynamic routes, right? With all that stuff. You can even start working on creating, but that's something that tomorrow's lecture is entirely about. Cool? That's about as much as I want to take you through today, right? This last little bit feels like a lot. Like I brought in EJS templates and I kind of zoomed through that. That's because you're going to be spending the entire day kind of learning about that, and I just wanted to put it on your radar, right? The things that I really want you to pull from today's lecture are that Express is built around the idea of the request and the response happen on a pipeline, and you can slot stuff into that pipeline. And the useful thing to put into that pipeline is usually routes. Right? That's usually it. Right? But as we go forward, you'll find more and more creative things to put into the pipeline. Cool? Is there anyone who's like just confused or overwhelmed or any of that? I mean, probably all of you. As I kind of leave you though, heads up, TinyApp is not an easy project, right? Like it's not easy, meaning if you find yourself having a tough time with like today or tomorrow, right? Especially Wednesday, right? Today is like, all right. Wednesday is like just sort of confusing. That's okay. It's expected, and just talk to each other about it and come talk to me, right? I just want to put it out there. Like my girlfriend took the program 2 years ago. She still talks about how hard TinyApp was. But think of it as a trial by fire that you're all going to get through. Just come talk to me. All right, have a great rest of your day. Notes will be sent out really soon. And yeah, go to the server page. Sure, I'll leave this up. That's not it. Yeah, notes will be out really soon. And yeah, have a great rest of the day.